Today, I'm going to be talking about Hidan. More specifically, I wanted to tackle his faith, the Way of Jashin, the only religion we hear about in the series. Well, I guess cult would be a more appropriate term. You see, the strange thing about this religion is that we know next to nothing about it, and the only Jashinists we're introduced to is Hidan and this one Hidan wannabe from the Boruto era, which leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Now, Hidan does go on about the commandments of his religion and his long-winded rituals, which do give us a few details, so it's not that we don't have any intel, but it's not really heavily discussed. And Kishimoto himself had to cut the Akatsuki suppression arc short due to pacing constraints, and Hidan and Kakuzu weren't as expanded on as initially intended. So I decided that today, I'll gather all the information that I could find regarding the Way of Jashin, its presumed origins, its commandments, and whether it can even qualify as a religion. I'll go over the manga, as well as the second chapter of the Akatsuki Hidan novel, since it does kind of go into the virtues of the faith. And finally, I'll also talk about Ryuki, the Jashinist that makes an appearance in Konoha Shinden. Now, going over the origins of the Way of Jashin, which is pretty obscure, and considering the fact that Hidan's the only follower of the practice that we see, and the other follower mentioned Hidan by name, all that has led some within the fanbase to believe that Jashinism was fabricated by Hidan. However, the tangible proof of Hidan's immortality and cursed ritual contradict this idea. So what really happened? Well, there's this theory I developed that could explain why Hidan's the only Jashinist we know. Let's briefly go over his background. Hidan hailed from the Hidden Steam village. After the Third Great Ninja War, the Hidden Steam decided to rebrand from its shinobi services to tourism due to their natural hot springs. Hidan, being a shinobi that knew nothing but conflict, was infuriated with that change. That made him isolate himself from his neighbors, and soon after, he'd come across the Way of Jashin. It was a cult-like religion that preached the saying of slaughtering thy neighbor. The group experimented with human sacrifices in order to achieve immortality. Eventually, the group succeeded in the experiment, and Hidan was granted immortality. Hidan says that Jashin had gifted him with this ability upon the multitude of sacrifices that the followers made so that they could keep the teachings of the Jashin faith going on forever. So my theory is that all of the other followers were massacred, and only then was Hidan rewarded with an immortal body that would allow him to offer up sacrifices to Lord Jashin for eternity. That's probably why Konoha couldn't find anyone else that followed that religion, since the rest of them were martyred. Okay, now that I covered the origins, let me go over the commands and beliefs of the Way of Jashin. Despite the fact that it was obviously a cult and was heavily influenced by murder and blood, the Way of Jashin did seem to share some virtues with real religions. Hidan considered himself to be a pious person, and he detested Kakuzu's greed for earthly possessions like money. He even tells Kakuzu that trading a monk's head for money was a one-way ticket to damnation. The Way of Jashin is, like Hidan said, absolute slaughter. Hidan has to provide a human sacrifice to his lord, and if he can't find one, he has to pray for forgiveness. Hidan also has to perform a long-winded ritual whenever he offered up a sacrifice. We know that the ritual could take well above 30 minutes, and his partner Kakuzu views it as a nuisance. Hidan himself doesn't seem too fond of the ritual, but he says that it's a commandment that has to be followed. There's also a commandment that prevents half-killings. Sacrifices have to be fully killed. Hidan also needed to draw the Jashin symbol with blood and stand on top of it whenever he wanted to perform the ritual, otherwise the effects wouldn't take place. Jashinism revers in the philosophy of shared pain, literal shared pain, as Hidan gets to experience the pain that he inflicts upon his victims. He even says that the gods will punish those that don't acknowledge others' pain, a saying that even Nagato can get behind. The way that Jashinism is described in the Akatsuki Hidan novel is that when Hidan kills someone, he sees it as a public service, that he's freeing that person from the fear of death. He followed the doctrine of thou shalt kill thy neighbor to a T, and the doctrinate was sacred. For example, when Hidan and Kakuzu were in the Valley of Lies and met a boy named Amiyuki that was interested in joining the Jashin faith, he once asked Hidan if the doctrinate meant that he'd kill Kakuzu one day, but Hidan reassures him by telling him that since he hated Kakuzu, he didn't consider him to be his neighbor. So it seems like Hidan had some standard for whom he performed the ritual against, and a blasphemer like Kakuzu was not fit to be a sacrifice. And towards the end of the chapter, when Hidan kills the kid and sacrifices him for Jashin, he tells Kakuzu that the ritual was gonna take longer this time, since Ameyuki's devotion to Jashin meant that this was a special martyr, and out of respect, Hidan was gonna take longer than usual to honor him. And that's all that we know about Jashin from the original series. There are these theories I've seen around that claim that Jashin was an Otsutsuki, because that's the only godlike clan we know, but there's really nothing to reaffirm that. The Way of Jashin does make another appearance in Konoha Shinden, Steam Ninja Scrolls manga. Another believer that followed in the footsteps of Hidan, Ryuki, starts causing mischief in the hidden Steam village, and the Leaf sends their shinobi in order to investigate the young women that had gone missing around the hot springs. In order to get granted immortality by Jashin like his predecessors, Ryuki and his followers gathered up travelers in order to sacrifice them in the masses to Jashin. But unfortunately for them, Asuma's daughter, Mirai Sarutobi, was one of the young women gathered up, and she comes face to face with the faith that took away her father. So anyways, she manages to catch this loser in a genjutsu and tricks him into thinking that he had her blood. And honestly, that was that. He was likely the only follower left of that violent faith. Ryuki does cite Hidan as a source of inspiration, so he may have known Hidan when he was alive, but I can't guarantee that. And that's all there is to the Way of Jashin. I don't think the faith even spread past the hidden Steam. The teachings pretty much died with Hidan, and then Ryuki tried to revive it, but then he got his ass handed to him by Asuma's daughter. That's as far as a death cult could go in popularity. No wonder it went extinct. Though the one interesting thing is, Hidan's immortality wasn't something he dreamt up, it was real. So that means that Hidan was in fact granted immortality from a divine entity, meaning that Jashin was most likely real. The Way of Jashin does have commandments, prayers, and rules, so it's kind of a religion, but it's basically a Satanist one that worships a demon. Jashin itself roughly translates to evil god or wicked heart. So I hope this was a deep enough dive into the Way of Jashin. Make sure to drop a like, and I'll see you soon.